This is the kickoff of a very special series, which hopefully will be going for a while in the months, years to come. I've got the pleasure to have Scott Donaldson, with who I have quite a few exchanges, and we're talking about a few things, including collaborations, and we talk about research and passions as well, which is really exciting. Just to let everyone know how the session is gonna go. So we are going to have a couple of minutes right now until 5:10 UK time. So by the end of my introduction, it's going to be another 6-7 minutes. We're going to have the time to sort out the logistics, to welcome people, and for Scott to have the chance to grab something to drink. And I'm mindful that you are in West Coast, California, in the US. I'm all the way here in Europe. It is end of the afternoon, so that you know, Scott, I'm not going to have a coffee. I have something else in my hand, and it's and this is not water. This is not water. It's 5 p.m. here in the UK. So we're going to have a few minutes to welcome people and to explain how things will go. At 5:10 sharp, we are going to have a chat, a very intimate chat by the fireside. Everyone will be having the chance to almost witness like a big brother session somehow. So whatever you say and do, Scott, stays here. But at the same time, it's not completely true because it's live streamed. So whatever we say, please, people, do not quote us, because this is an intimate session. But I'm mindful that some people will take notes, and this is okay. So we'll then, at 5:10, have 30 minutes, you and I, Scott. There's a few talking points that we have. And at the end, we will open the floor to question and answers. This is one of the exciting moments when people can ask questions about, it could be about the research, about the practitioner's experience we've had, about the work that you've done in the past, that you're currently doing now, that I'm doing now, and so on and so forth. Behind the scenes, we've got Chloe, who's doing an amazing job at making sure, holding the fort, as I call it, metaphorically. She's making sure that everything works well, logistics-wise, and she will be making sure that people can raise their hand. There's a raise hand function on Zoom. For those of you who are here, for those of you who are following via Facebook Live, LinkedIn Live, or one of the live stream, by all means, just type the questions as well. But preferably, if you can, join via this Zoom link, which is available on Eventbrite. Chloe will be collecting and keeping an eye on the multiple streams and the team behind the scene of doing this. So you will then have the time to ask your questions, first come, first serve, and Chloe will go through the list of questions, and to the best of our knowledge and resource and time that we have, Scott and I will be answering those questions. So that's pretty much it. What else? I've got Chloe sending me. Sako, please make sure that you are sharing this. So Q&A that's mentioned. By all means, you can leave comments in the chat box, as well as raising hands. These are the two things that you can do. And LinkedIn should be live as well now, and I don't know which other social media live stream. So it's quite exciting. Scott, we've got another couple of minutes. Any prayers, any wise words, anything you want to share or vent before we start?
No, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I hope we have a fun, informative, and pleasant chat, and everybody gets something out of it, just maybe personally or professionally. I'm grateful for everyone that's joined. So that would be my prayer. Just gratitude for everyone that's here. And optimistic about the future as well, and where kind of the division is going. For the people that are joining, I'm running the IPA, Positive Work and Organization Division. So that's kind of where I've connected with Soko. We've kind of brought Soko into some of our division meetings. He's got some
throwing that hook as that. All right.
We're up to, we have these different initiatives that we're doing on bridging the gap between science and practice. So that's sort of our big brand that we're going for within our division is, looking at the struggles of scientists and academics, and looking at the struggles of practitioners and going, oh my God, we can work together to reduce or attenuate some of these struggles and find a common language, and simultaneously kind of move the field forward, right? By creating that common language and bridging those gaps. So that's what I'm excited about in terms of IPA. And then, of course, all the different applications out to things like leadership, like we're talking about today, the connection between, leader well-being and employee well-being, connection between leaders and, their followers and their well-being. So a lot of talking points to discuss. And yeah. How about you, Soko? What are you grateful for?
I mean, first of all, I'm so excited. What I'm feeling now is excitement, enthusiasm, and gratitude, because the International Positive Psychology Association is such a beautiful community. But at the same time, there's so many other communities I happen to be part of. Psychology communities, positive psychology communities, coaching communities, business communities, and also different type of minorities and groups and tribes. And every time there's a group, especially after spending 2 years in this bloody COVID-19, stuck at home, not seeing people, sometimes, that Zoom impact, the Zoom effect that some of our fellow psychology scholars have been investigating for the past 2.5 years. And now we've got enough longitudinal data to say what COVID, the impact it has on people, like who are stuck home with the kids or their partners or their housemates. I feel so grateful that we can reconnect with people face to face, but also online as well. And it's awesome. And I mean, when we joined the EPA, what event was that the other day? Well, it's quite a few of them, but it's beautiful because you really genuinely feel how people care about people. And that's one of the community I really, really love. And also I've been evolving in the leadership development sphere as a hybrid profile, as in academia and science, but also as a practitioner. And I really, really genuinely feel that leaders care about putting people first now, and not only like top line and bottom line. So I'm quite excited to get your view on that. And this is going to be a chat. So I've got a few kind of talking points for both of us, and I'd love to get your views, both of us as academics, scholars, but also has been spending quite like 15 years in corporate world before I've been in startups. And there's really a different vibe. So I'd love to get your view and for us to kind of have a fruitful conversation. I hope that people can get something out of this, personally and professionally, as I said. So, and also, it's crazy, but I really feel like so grateful to, it's going to sound cliche, but the other day I was jogging with some music, and I'm particularly sensitive and passionate about music. For those who have read a bit of my profile, I evolve between performing arts and science, and actually I'm conducting a mega big project to bring wellbeing through the performing arts. Which surprisingly, there's not even a division on arts and psychology, but that's something to discuss offline. I'd love to keep something, but you know me, too many things. I have to make my choice and let go of certain project. And I was, jogging with music and I just felt alive, and I felt so grateful to be able to breathe and to walk in the park outside and have music, and that sense of being alive. I think we sometimes take it for granted when you breathe and when you can sit and see the sky and be free. I'm grateful for that as well. So long story short, I'm grateful for being alive and being part of this community at EPA as a member and as someone who, to the best of my capabilities, can contribute to the work and organization division as well, Scott. So thanks for getting me in this division.
Another thing, let's implement a brief positive psychological intervention right now. For everyone who's in the audience, maybe put in the chat, what's one thing you're grateful for today? When you woke up or as you're ending your day, wherever you are internationally, maybe one good thing that happened to you today, or one thing you're grateful for kind of in terms of your overall life satisfaction? I'd like to get some engagement going from the audience. Hi, Luis. Thanks for joining.
in today. Yeah, I like
Happy
that.
New Year Day. That's great. Looks like everyone's grateful for our fireside chats.
Healthy body and mind. Oh yes. We sometimes take it for granted, but gosh, we are surrounded, especially after COVID. There's so many people that we don't have that health.
Okay, I recognize the name, Stuart Donaldson. May or may not be related to him. The good energy, positive psychology brings us all.
I love the word energy. Absolutely. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's something to be said about the relational energy, the positive energy, spreading contagion.
Yeah, it's surprisingly, I mean, speaking about passion, which for obvious reasons is so dear to me, passion has been described by so many global leaders I've interviewed, the data collected as an motivating fire-like energy. Energy is a word that has been used a lot. I was part of an accuracy inquiry summit with Dr. in San Francisco last 3 days. Oh yeah.
Hi, Robin.
Thanks for being feeling extremely positive. Gosh, we need more of that positive energy being spread. Emotional contagion in psychology is a well-known construct. And when people write words like this, it is so contagious. When people say I'm extremely positive, you see it in the body, you see it in the words. Grateful for being part of EPA community. By the way, it's 1:12 in Japan. Oh my God, bless you, real cool, Fujita. Bless you for being with us. 1 a.m. That is dedication / motivation. Oh dear, oh dear. Scott, as people are writing what they are grateful for, I would suggest that we kick it off and have that conversation. So it's kind of like a fireside, just you and me. And I mean, the only thing missing apart from the fire here is the chestnut. Chestnut is like do, 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 do. You know, like a white Christmas. You know, the kind of music. And then you feel like summertime, but Christmas around the corner. I love Christmas. I know that some people are joining because of the topic as well, and people who are connected through LinkedIn or Facebook live stream as well, probably because of the topic or the theme. One of the things I thought we could talk about, Scott, and I know that you've conducted research that directly into that myself as well. And as a practitioner as well myself, and as an academic that teaches that discipline, I am very sensitive to the concept of leadership. So I thought it would be great for us to kind of discuss the state of the art of leadership right now. So where do we sit right now, and especially with this huge, massive, disruptive era called a pandemic? And not only a pandemic, I mean, think about it, bloody hell, there's like a war. And not only a war, there are wars, because the media talk about one war, but then think about it, there's so many disruptions in the world. And in psychology and organizational behavior and leadership studies, we know the concept of disruption, right? Made popular by the concept of VUCA, which originally originated from the military world, like a world that is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. But then what's the state of the art of the leadership? Let's talk about that. I've got views, you've got views, and we might have done research around this. What do you think? Where do we stand in leadership? And what's your view on where are we? Where do we come from? Where are we? Where are we heading?
Yeah, I guess like you kind of mentioned, on one hand, sort of the backdrop of the world, there's some cause for concern, right? This VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. We have, unstable, foreign affairs and wars. The pandemic has obviously shifted the nature of, I guess, the human race, but also how we work and how we manage and how leaders kind of interact with their followers. There's diversity that's brought a lot of new challenges and opportunities as well. So there's a lot of movement, but from my perspective, I think all of these, you could, for a lack of a better word, perceive them as negative things, also opens up a case for positive psychology, particularly as it pertains to the workplace and leadership. So now more than ever, I think there's, not only a business case for well-being, but I think there's also an ethical and moral responsibility of leaders and organizations to focus on their leaders' well-beings and employees' well-beings. And that's kind of what my work has been, my doctoral work, my postdoctoral work, and some of my recent work in my current position out of University of Southern California has been looking at which well-being interventions work best for whom. Does leader behavior, impact employee well-being? Right now, some of my research is looking at a representative sample of African-American employees. So we got 10,000 African-American professionals across all of the United States, and we're measuring their the well-known kind of model in positive psychology, PERMA, and then myself and some other scholars that I worked with added different dimensions, 4 more dimensions. So we have this PERMA plus 4 model that we're using to measure employee well-being, design interventions. So we asked all of these African-American employees, does your leader's behavior impact your well-being? And we have found a clear link between that. So I think, that work, past meta-analytic work that I've done, looking at the impact of, positive psychology interventions at work, it seems the empirical data is showing that there's a clear connection between, employee well-being and performance, including all sorts of different outcomes, turnover, productivity, retention, all of these things. So, yeah.
That's interesting, because what I'm hearing from you is I buy what you're saying, because as the other side of my life, the other half of my life has been a practitioner and not a scientist and scholars. But when I put in practice what I investigate myself, empirical models and existing theories that are kind of modeled and adapted, the same way you're adapting the PERMA model, which is so current. I mean, this is what we normally do in positive psychology as well. Those that are trained in the MAP program globally in the US or London or elsewhere, they kind of take a model and they adapt, and hopefully they can measure, which is something super important. At the same time, I'm thinking, to what extent do CEOs really care about well-being, as opposed to this is just a nice to have on like the corporate brochures? And when I coach CEOs, or when I work on toxic behaviors, the dark side of leadership, this is something I'd love for us to talk about. You got CEOs that are super cool, super nice, and then when they are pushed to the extreme, when they let down their guards, and their nice attitude suddenly becomes a bit more obscure, that well-being thing just disappears. And when I actually work with them, coaching, mentoring, or kind of what I call leadership shadowing, like sitting in the room or online with their board members, and I'm like hidden as a camera off, or I'm sitting at the back of the room and they all trust me, this NDA sign. I'm kind of taking data and writing what I'm observing and the pattern. And I see that, yes, they say well-being, but in fact, what is manifested behaviorally is just very different sometimes, especially when they're pushed to the extreme, when they're going through a week that is very tough, when they're under stress and pressure. And especially with the COVID, there's so many of the C-levels and leaders I work with, especially entrepreneurs, who don't even have the time to think about, happiness and well-being of employees. These people are kind of managing 100 people, and the first thing they want is to survive as a startup. And especially in the UK, London, and in Cambridge, it's such a vibrant startup community. How many died, disappeared because of COVID-19? They had to go back to the parents. They couldn't even pay their rent. And suddenly that beautiful concept of well-being disappeared as a priority, and it's back to what they call the reality, back to business. So paying the bills, going back to the top line and bottom line. And it's what is sad but observed is then they go back to some bad habits. And we know through Professor Wood, I love her research, by the way, on habits. It takes about 8 weeks to form habits, or to lose a habit, with the concept of creating some barriers to some habits. For example, if you want to lose weight. But people lose their habits so quickly, healthy ones, and they're back to their dark side. So when you talk about employee well-being and leaders' well-being, and I also investigated that, I even came up with a theory on the dark side of passion and leadership, when passion is, like, I'm going to simplify that, over the top. It can brighten you. I know Robert Byron, if you're listening or if you're browsing this, you've got the harmonious passion, but which doesn't necessarily means the good passion, But then you also have the other side of passion that really can burns you. And I put together a few slides. I don't know what we're going to discuss today in detail, but I put a few things. And one of the things I noticed is when people start being blinded by that passion for transactions like cash, brand, product, they don't put people first. And sometimes the well-being just poof, disappears. So do your data suggest that as well? Because my data are suggesting that there's a tipping point after which or beyond which leaders can slip from the bright to the dark side of their own leadership. So what did your data even investigate this? Or did you read any research on this?
No, but one thing that that immediately comes to my mind, my immediate reaction is that positive psychology is not necessarily easy, right? Like you said, sort of the default behavioral things we fall on are negative reactions: anxiety, boredom, depression, stress. Like under the stress response, your attention narrows, you become more focused. Positive psychology and using a positive psychological approach, especially at work, something that you have to deliberately practice, right? Not a given. It's not something that we find that people just kind of have in their back pocket, right? That's why we design interventions. We, create awareness about this approach. And another sort of thought I had when you were speaking was, when, things are falling on hard times, they're becoming more stressful, attention is narrowing. That's, in my opinion, when you need positive psychology the most, as counterintuitive as that may sound. Because I do think it serves as a protective mechanism. Because if you're stressed and if your negative emotion is really high, I don't think in that state you're going to be productive. So even though the work you need to be productive, you're stressed. When you're in that emotional state, I don't think it's going to produce your best work. And that's what we find too in our work.
I'm going to build on what you're saying. So a lot of what you're saying links to a lot of the psychological research. But we'll talk about psychology, but to be honest, we also borrow a lot in social sciences from other disciplines, or behavior, sociology, and but in all behavior. So when you zoom out and look at not the individual, but like groups of people in corporate organizations and in teams, there's something called positive nudges. So when you start building positive nudges or positive habits, that could be a positive intervention. There's quite a lot of this. A prestigious inquiry itself is a positive intervention. But if you are a practitioner that are trained in a prestigious inquiry, and I know that Kim Cameron discusses this as part of the model of positive leadership, I think it really can work. Mental fitness programs that a lot of companies and consultancy firms and positive psychologists are using, that also work at the systemic and team level. Now, the thing that I'm also noticing as you speak about that is I think you know what it takes, and that's what I see as a practitioner. Beyond the data, it's great. It all sounds beautiful, but I think there is a preliminary requirement for this to work. It's a certain level of self-awareness for the leaders and meta-awareness. The leaders needs to be aware of what the hell's happening around him or her. So you can have all of those beautiful PI, positive interventions, and great leadership development programs from one of those top consulting firms in the world or some top executive coaches. If they don't develop or don't nourish that self-awareness to start with, and meta-awareness, that sense of entering the room, and they can immediately sense what the hell is happening in the room. Like they don't even have to talk. And, there's something that happened here. There's toxic behaviors here. This is meta-awareness. I think if you don't have a certain level of awareness, it's really hard for people to even be mindful that A, they need help and support, and B, that they need to do something about this for their team's well-being and engagement. So I think there's really a matter of engagement, awareness. And my own research suggests this, and CEOs I interviewed in the world and data that are crossed with the CEO's words suggest really that the level, the intensity of awareness and the type of mindset, if you look at kind of a 2x2 matrix, and I have an empirical model for that, gives you the sort of leaders that you are. And I think the bottom line, awareness, self and meta awareness is so critical. Is that something that you also came across in the research that you use and did?
Yes. So something that maps onto that I found is psychological, which I'm sure you're familiar with. So in this meta-analysis I did with someone that's an attendee here and some colleagues at Claremont Graduate University, we looked at all these different, approaches. And one of the most effective ones in the workplace was psychological capital, which kind of a shoot off of what you were saying with awareness. It's that state-like, malleable sort of optimism, resilience.
The hero model, the HERO hero model, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's kind of what you were alluding to. It's having that sort of state-like, attitude of what's going on. And that proved to be the most effective. Another one was job crafting. So being able to control the demands and resources of your job to achieve, the best outcomes. But that, like what you said earlier, that's the $1 million question that I think practitioners and, specifically scientists are trying to get at, which is there, how do we convince these C-suite, executives and leaders that well-being increases performance and there's a connection to the bottom line, right? That's what they all want to know.
I mean, there are some research. I mean, I said that, and Chloe, if I could share my slides, that would be amazing. I've gathered a few couple of slides. I'm not quite sure of what we'll be discussing, but it might be a good time to share some of them. To this question, isn't it? I mean, Kim Cameron, but also other scholars, Duplessis as well, they also linked into this as well, into the concept of positive leadership, but also positive self-leadership. So the ability to kind of self-lead yourself. I'm just looking at how I could share my screen.
While you're doing, Chris actually had a really good comment or question in the chat. He says, do you feel that, I'm just kind of paraphrasing here, Chris, do you feel that corporate leaders actually know what well-being means? And that might strike to the point that Soko was just making, which is there might be a misconception about well-being, right? A lot of people that aren't familiar with sort of the well-being science or positive psychology theory just think it, is that a therapy session? Or are you guys a bunch of, Pollyannas, like, like a kumbaya circle, right? It's kind of the negative stereotype that we see from people that aren't familiar with it. So that's a great point. A starting kind of block with that would be to get buy-in from leaders. So, providing awareness to them on what well-being actually is and different components it's comprised of. In the case of the PERMA+4 model, there might be 9 different dimensions that are predictive of well-being. So thank you for the thoughtful comment, Chris. I would totally agree with that's where you have to start. Like, what is well-being before we actually get into the, coaching and intervention part?
Yeah, Chris, I love this question. My answer would be, and I've worked with the likes of Criteo, a global multi-billion US dollars French tech company. I work with, the likes of the social elements and marketing agency. I mean, this is public information. That's why I'm spreading these names. And I've worked with other people as well, like people from the group EDF, a huge French energy giant, and other companies in Spain and around the world, but also one-on-one leaders. I can tell you one thing. When you start talking about well-being to C-suite, first of all, they're like, are you going to ask us to close our eyes and boom, have some mindful? They're like immediately falling into the big stereotype. But the chance that I have is that I got 15 years of corporate experience, including some senior leadership roles. I'm like, hang on. First of all, that's not what we're talking about. So that sounds a way you're describing that as BS. And second, if I may, I would rephrase that. So, and when we start talking about well-being, what I personally would do, and also what research suggests, and there's research on terminologies to use with a corporate type of profile. If I can dig this out, I would actually share these things with the audience. I think there's a way to rephrase things. You don't have to call that well-being, but you can call that development programs that help build high-performing teams. That speaks to people. I mean, you don't have to talk about happiness and well-being. They are scared of this. And sometimes mindfulness, like, I have to close my eyes. So my understanding in 2022, there is a dichotomy between what the scientists and scholars are describing in the beautiful academic scientific papers and what the corporate practitioners world is understanding. I think there's a gap, and I think we need to adapt. And I think we're doing, to be quite honest, not yet a good job, to not say a poor job, at being able to demystify to practitioners and C-suites what the hell well-being means and why they should care about this. Before they said what, it should be why. Why should you care about well-being and investing $1 million in this multi-billion dollars company in the well-being of your company, of your employees? Because it increases the performance, it reduces churn rate, it increases the level of engagement, and so on and so forth. There's multiple research about this. I think they don't get it yet. And what we should do, I think there's notable things, is a phase of education. And I think that's why I really, really love the work and organization division at EPA, because some of the profiles that we have there and the ethos of the WOD division at EPA are precisely, I call that the hybrid profiles, like the Marvel superheroes. Those that understand research and science and data, but they can demystify and explain that in a practical way and applied way to practitioners. And I think positive psychology has a superpower to be applied immediately. Hence, programs like a master in applied positive psychology. The word applied is there for a reason. I was part of the University of East London academic team teaching students positive psychology and coaching psychology. And the applied is something I've been constantly pushing forward, because move away from theory. Practitioners don't buy it otherwise. So I think we need to go through an educational phase, the way we publish papers, the terminology we use. And in fact, I would argue that maybe there's maybe a merit in having a big research paper or a book published around translation between theoretical terminology and how we apply that to practical worlds. Perhaps that is one thing. And I think training is another thing as well. There's a lot of unconscious bias. So people think a certain way and have some apprehension about happiness and well-being. And I think I would argue, and there's some research supporting what I'm about to say, there is a difference in terms of understanding of the concept of happiness and well-being. Yep, and we need to. Some of you would know that there's specific, psychological well-being, subjective well-being is part of what we define as happiness. But depending on culture, people understand that differently. I've worked between the Middle East, Asia, and North, South, and Southeast Asia. You have differences of understanding, which itself is linked to the level of English that they have. I don't speak Thai or Cambodian. I do speak Mandarin and Cantonese and other Asian languages. But if I try to explain well-being to some teams in Bangkok or others in Cambodia, they don't necessarily understand. So I think there's merit in demystifying that through simplifying the terms, educating people, training. And last but not least, I think it needs to start with the top. So if the top really believe in that, it's not simply a, how can I phrase that in a nice way? I'm going to be quite blunt. If it's not only a corporate communication BS, like, oh, it sounds good to have that on the corporate brochure, we care about what the employee well-being and happiness is paramount for us. If the leader is he or she really behind this, I think then usually people understand it because it cascades down. And that would take and require the leader to be self-aware and then meta-aware. So that might be through mentoring, training, or coaching as well. So I think that's a great point that you're making here. I really love it.
Yeah, I would agree that leadership buy-in is everything. And yeah, this bridging the gap concept really keeps resonating with people. People in the area of positive psychology that are practicing it or that are researching it, there is this clear gap, right? And one problem that we've been discussing in the IPA work and organization division is, there's different criteria of merit or evaluation criteria for each group. Like for an academic, it's, can you get funding? Can you publish papers? Can you teach, right? But for a practitioner, it's the paper writing and the scientific part isn't what they get rewarded for, right? They want to get the findings translated into a clear intervention. They're trying to please clients. They're totally different motivations, I guess, and trying to somehow reconcile those or build common wins too between the groups is something that we're looking into. Like, how do we not operate in these silos in the university, science system, and then in practice? And it's hard because the reward, the incentive structure they're orthogonal, they're different to each other. So somehow creating common wins, maybe working with practitioners to get access to a lot of data in their work, and then, increasing collaborations in that way to work on papers.
I like that. Yeah.
Right? Like, they come up with the ideas based on what they're seeing. That gets mapped onto the literature. And then you kind of build it in that way versus just coming up with theory sort of in a lab with undergraduate students.
I really like that. The metaphorical view, the analogy that I see is the bridge between the science scholars and practitioners. And I think, what in the world of academia we call academic papers, which for a lot of practitioners are boring because the terminology is so complex to read. In the world of practitioners, they're like white papers because it's digested, it's practical, easy to read, 4-6 pages, straight to the point, bullet points. And there's even a how-to or like a summary page at the end usually. And I think what you're saying is so current and so valid. I remember when I was in the corporate world working for spin-off of GE, General Electric, in data science. We were approaching universities to be able to take fundamental science finding and translate that into practitioners' language and programs. And if we could do the same for positive psychology and positive leadership and leadership in general, I think it would help to have like collaborations. Something else, Scott, that I'm wondering, back to starting from the top. I've got this little slide here that I've been teaching some of my students. Can you see my screen, Scott?
Not yet. It's still loading on my end. There it is.
You know what? When you look at historically the history of leadership, it's been there for we investigated, BAS, BHSS, that big book of leadership is like a global reference. And when you look at the first publications, yes, there's references to the concept of leadership, even in anthropological studies hundreds of years ago. But really, as an interest in science, it really started in the 1950s in such of the trait theories. People thinking, people are born leaders. And some of my students asked me, are we born or are we made leaders, right? And then we have a huge debate. But then you have behavioral scientists, behavioral style that believe, no, you know what? Great leadership is based on what someone does. It's not necessarily you're born or you're made leader based on the facts or what you do. And then you got situationalists, I would say, contingency in the 70s saying that, well, hang on, it's not only whether you're born or you're made, it's not only what you do, but you have to take into consideration the context. So think about COVID-19. So you could be an amazing CEO or a startup badass entrepreneurs, and suddenly, a pandemic hits hard and you lose track of your leadership. It's disruptive, right? So that is, and then there's measurement of what is a good leader. So situation kind of affects and defines the type of leadership that you use. Then this transformational theorists say that leaders engage with the followers to raise the motivation. So we're kind of entering a bit that field, Scott, and positive psychology and positive leadership. And you know what? In my own research, I actually found out and that there's another concept that is too poorly investigated, and it's the concept of mindset. I think we might be sitting in the leadership paradigm, which is like we talk about the trait, we talk about the behavior, but then there's also the concept of mindset. I know that Duckworth, I know that Carol Dweck, they spent years investigating the concept of mindset, especially Carol Dweck published a beautiful book as well. Growth mindset versus fixed mindset. I would argue that the level of awareness and autonomy for the leader, and autonomy is one of the building block cornerstones in self-determination theories, which is the core motivation. So level of autonomy, low or high. I decided to be a CEO, or I decided to launch my startup versus somebody forced me to be in that role. I was CFO and they put me in a CEO role, but I didn't ask for it. So low autonomy versus the type of mindset place you in certain type of leaders, type of leaders. And I think it might be my view that we're sitting in kind of a new, is that a leadership paradigm? But I think that the mindset of the leaders needs to be considered in the way we define the type of leadership that is manifested in an organization or by people. And I would really love for more scholars and practitioners to investigate the concept of mindset, because think about it. How much can you affect the mindset? Well, guess what? Coaching, training, work on unconscious bias, a few. But we also know from Carol Dweck's work as well that, yes, I mean, there are students that fail an exam or managers that fail their target. And those group A that would say, oh, I would never make it. And group B that would say, you know what, I failed, but I could do better. I'm going to work harder. And actually then they become better. And with that concept of pride, there's two types of pride. There's, I think, authentic pride. The other one is heuristic pride. Heuristic pride is about the me, I, myself. You don't want that. But the authentic pride is that, like a little child, like my daughter, she's 5 years old. She'd go on a bike. It's 2 wheels bike. And she falls down. But after a few weeks, she manages to be on the 2 wheels, and she goes and she doesn't fall. And she did it, Dad. And then that is kind of an authentic pride. It's good pride, right? So I think if you can train people or coach people on that type of mindset, then it actually can positively affect the mindset. I would argue that there are more research needed on how do we affect the mindset of leaders, which itself will affect the type of leadership manifested in an organization. So part of my research is this, but of course, I'm just one person. I just conducted that research for 5-6 years, and there's more to do, right? I don't know. What do you think, Scott? I think if you look at the evolution of research on leadership, don't you think there's something around mindsets or maybe other things as well?
I agree 100%. And I've been talking about this PERMA +4 model that I've recently validated and published on. And one of the new dimensions that we added was mindset for that particular reason.
Oh.
Yeah. We added economic security. I know you've alluded to that.
Yeah.
The physical work environment. But what we found in our research was that mindset was one of the most predictive dimensions of performance.
Correct.
So, and that doesn't surprise you, right? And what we used to develop that construct or that measure was Seligman has this perspective theory. So kind of being able to, evaluate your future. You're in the present, but you're also able to evaluate your future and envision sort of, positive outcome expectancies in that. So it's that big picture that you're talking about as well. And I think there's a lot more research that can be done to, demonstrate the association between a leader's mindset and an employee's mindset, a leader's mindset and employee well-being and performance, right? Yeah. So much more work is needed to show that connection because we all have this.
And you know what? I would argue that even in my own research, I was challenging myself, and that's what we do in social and behavioral science, right? Especially in social science. I would argue that existing research, and I've done a massive systematic review at the very start of my doctorate at the beginning, and I realized that, gosh, those research on passion in leadership is so bidimensional. Like it's either good or bad. What about something in the middle, right? And so, I mean, a lot of the research as well, I get it, all about like how leadership help, build high performing teams and all of that. I get it because that is it's cash, it's money at the end of the day. So PhD programs are funded through this as well. And I'm wondering, maybe there's merit in investing more on the dark side of leadership. I know that Professor Hogan did a great job and he did build a great company around psychometric test that is very robust and reliable and valid around the dark side of leadership. And there's something that, I put a couple of slides together, and I think the dark side of leadership and not necessarily good versus bad or bright versus dark side, but I think there's something about the dark side, Scott, that is not yet investigated enough. And let me just try to get the slide. There's only 6 of them, I think. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, this is some of the research I presented at the European Positive Psychology Conference not long ago, and it was really cool in Iceland. Oh my God, such a beautiful country, by the way. I would argue, so that specifically looks at passion in leadership, and I would argue that there is a dark side, which passion is like a motivation, fire, energy, and a lot of people define it as such. And so if you use the analogy, passion can either drive you, brightens you, or burns you. And there's like a tipping point. And I think the tipping point when you step from the bright to the dark side. So that's why I'm saying a lot of this research is so bilateral, bidimensional, good or bad. But what about things in the middle? And I think that what is in the middle is the level of awareness, but also that level of autonomy, according to my research. And I think the tipping point is when you find that ability to self-monitor yourself. Like Hogan would say that, when you let your guards down, it's so easy to slide into the dark side. And then your enthusiasm or passion can become toxic. You start shouting at people and you don't even see it, Like, I know I'm over enthusiastic, and sometimes on Sunday, my partner is like, okay, just tone down. It's Sunday, it's a weekend. We don't need that much energy. And I don't realize that, right? I need to self-monitor myself a little bit more. And so awareness is so critical, but also the level of autonomy. And when I look into my research and I spare the data, you know what, Scott, I actually find that, there is that fire that motivates people for better and for worse. Well, in what is for worse, there are so many behavioral, cognitive, emotional, physiological, and physical bad sides. So, people, they're over passionate, they start ruminating, they bring work to home, they forget about their wife, husbands, or lovers, they're blinded, they become impatient, they start shouting, stress increases, and you know what? And they start self-neglecting. They put on weight, there's so much data behind this, but the point I want to make is, I really think that there's merit in and that's maybe for some of the scholars in this call and practitioners to maybe work together to investigate that gray zone. What can we do to prevent? The world doesn't have to be dark or bright, but what can we do to navigate in that middle area and to help leaders, managers, and practitioners not slide to a very extreme side of leadership, which we know can bring to higher turnover, turnover of top talents, or increase of stress among teams, and actually reduce performance as well. I think this may be something to investigate in that gray zone. What to do in that gray zone before it's too late. What do you think, Scott?
I think there is such a thing as too much of a good thing. And there was this incredible paper in the Harvard Business Review in 2017 on the dark side of engagement, which laid out a similar concept, which is you can have too much of a good thing. It's good to be engaged, but engagement can turn into burnout if it's too excessive, which is what you were kind of showing in that model, which is, if positive qualities or positive traits become excessive, they're no longer positive. They tip into the dark side, right? So, something like ambition can become greed. Engagement can turn into burnout. I think, maybe some of these positive psychological constructs do have a ceiling, and that could be measured. I don't think it has been measured, but having too much of a good thing could create imbalance, right? And mess up other pillars in the system of well-being. So, I think that's a great...
What's too much? That's maybe a beautiful research and maybe a measurement or scale in terms of intensity of what, by the way, what is a variable we're looking at? Again, I think this is really something that would be fascinating. I'm mindful of the time, Scott, and maybe we should open the floor to Q&As now and have a proper conclusion at the end. Chloe, I know that you're behind the scene doing an amazing job at holding the fort on the social media and collecting questions from everywhere and from people here in this current chat here as well. Do people have any questions? Feel free to raise your hand, and then Chloe is going to mute you, or you can type the questions. Scott and I will be reading it and going through those.
I saw Liz was on there too. Hi, Liz. Thanks for joining. Liz is the immediate past president of the IPA Work and Org Division. There she is. Hi, Liz.
So proud of you and the work that you're doing. I do have a question. So, I had to jump, so you may have addressed this, but Soko, okay, Sunday, you're still so passionate. You are who you are. How do you tamp it down a little?
It's a great question.
I know too, actually.
So I tell you what I do. Then I tell you what my partner would say about what I do, whether it works or not. The first thing is I work. Let me start by saying, and I'm going to build on what Scott said earlier. I mean, positivity is something you have to work constantly. I would use the current metaphor analogy. I think positivity is a muscle. And so there's no secret recipe. You can't sort this or fix it within 24 hours. So what I do is I've been practicing mindfulness for ages. I teach and I practice mindfulness, and I do this. And with mindfulness, no excuse within my shower time and when I do jogging as well. Mindful running. I should write something about mindful running. So that helps me gain a certain level of mindfulness and awareness, which are two different constructs, by the way. The second thing is when I'm over the top, and people, I always ask myself, what am I feeling right now? What am I thinking, and how is it manifesting on my body? So I'm getting a bit hot, and when I'm sensing that is going a bit too much, I do something that I call SBA. So I'm actually writing a paper on this. I stop, I breathe in and out. I stop what I'm doing, about to shout at someone, to raise my voice, or not that I shout at people much, but my child, for example. I stop, I walk away, then I breathe 60 seconds to let the air go straight to my brain. This is also neurobiological and physical. And then I act, meaning I go back to what I was about to do. And the third thing, back to self-awareness, we all have blind spot. If you look at the Johari window, extremely well-known concept in therapies and also coaching. You don't know what you don't know. Like when you drive a car, there's a blind spot. You might hit a bike that is in a dead angle. So I ask people, I ask my coach, my mentors, my spouse, my friends, and I journal a lot. And at the end of the day, it allows me to see my limits. From I want to increase my playground, which is a level of awareness I know about myself and what people know about me. And I'm trying to reduce the blind spots. And by doing this, increasing that playground, what I know about myself, what the world knows about me, I then can work on what I know doesn't work. So with SBA, mindfulness, and journaling as well. And also, I'm trying to be self-compassionate, because sometimes we all have bad days and bad weeks and bad months sometimes. And sometimes it just doesn't work. So you want to be self-compassionate. And I tap myself on the shoulder for trying hard. And I tell my spouse, I know I've been a bit over the top during these holidays, or I don't know when. You know what? Let's treat ourselves with the next musical theater, or let's have a mug of hot chocolate. Or so you want to kind of celebrate the fact that you know this, but you also want to be mindful that you want to work and certain things. So that's what I do. So it's a package of different things that are ongoing for a long time, and things that are in the moment, like SBA, stop, breathe, act, and a lot of asking others, including with my coach and mentors as well, so that I increase my self-awareness. I think it needs to start with self-awareness as well.
And we've got a question from Robin Johnson. If you'd like to ask your question, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I'm not driving yet, but I will be after you answer my question. So that's why I'm on my phone. And fabulous discussion. And I was just in was privileged to participate in a 3-day appreciative inquiry summit with Dr. Cooperrider up in San Francisco. And a notion that occurred to me is when leaders launch into some of these positive psychology or positive organizational scholarship practices or experiments, there's a sense of, I'm going to lose control over the organization. And in reality, most often what happens is just an improvement in the organization. So they actually get more control, but maybe a different kind of control. So I'm wondering, is there a way of like reassuring leaders when you do these well-being practices, when you do these, positive interventions, as we would call them, to kind of tamp down to use your terminology, tamp down their fear of losing control, so they will really engage and want to do these interventions, which are so helpful.
Scott, do you want to take this first? I've got a few views, but do you want to take this, or do you have a view on that?
It's a great question. I could see that being a problem. It's a trust issue, right? It's having their guard up. As a leader, they definitely want to control the situation. I think one, thing they could do is start slow. Like, instead of launching this huge intervention across, the entire company with 200 employees, why not do like a pilot version of it just to test it? So there's not large repercussions, right? Or ones that could hurt the company. That's one thing I would do. Like, if I were trying to convince a leader, is say, well, let's just collect some pilot data. Let's do this with, this department or this group or this team over here, and we'll monitor it, we'll evaluate it, we'll see if it works. And if it seems to be effective, then we can scale it up. I think that would be one strategy to create trust with the leader, instead of saying, this works, you got to do this. It also puts a lot of stress on the practitioner, or the person that's trying to implement it in the organization. If it fails, then it's not good for anyone, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Great answer.
I love that. And to build on what you're saying, I really like what you just said about, like, I call that fact finding, Scott. First of all, what I'm hearing is that sense of, I'm sensing an imposter syndrome, the idea of having a saboteur in the leader's mind, like, I'm doing what I can, but I'm kind of losing control. And imposter syndrome has been investigated by some of my students. They published, actually one of them published a beautiful paper on imposter syndrome leaders. I think it's never one positive intervention that works, but it's usually a package of things. And I would say that you want to work at cognitive level, emotional level, and physical level. I would always work with my leaders and people and teams that I work with by meeting the client where they are. Some people are highly cognitive, and leaders and CXO, no kidding, they're like sharp-minded, think fast, and they're like cognitive, like zzz. So for that, I love what Scott is saying. Fact find. You think that you're losing control. What is the measurement? Actually check whether you're losing control, whether your teams adore the strategy and what you're putting in place and what you're doing. If it's improving or not improving. Cognitively, fact finding, I think that helps. Second, emotionally, they can work on that sense of imposter syndrome or saboteur. That could be mentoring, it could be coaching, it could be journaling to really immediately address the emotional states. And the third thing is physical. Some people, you can try emotional and cognitive type of therapies and coaching, but sometimes some people are physical. And I would invite some of my body, and I happen to be trained in performing arts, and I work with kinetic and somatic science. I meet where they are, and some people are super physical. They are connected with their body. So I did an exercise of pressing them very strongly with their permission, right? With their permission. And I asked them to let go. And in that ribs here, there was something they wanted to shout out. And you know what? We ended up having their vulnerability opening up in tears. The CEO in tears in front of the CMO, CFO, CTO, and everyone asking for help. And that vulnerability turned into an increased trust within the team because they opened up, asked for help. And in fact, unlike what they thought to be vulnerable, it increased the trust because people humanized the leader and said, I connect to that person. But you have to do this, but first you have to be trained to be able to do the kind of things. But tapping into the physicality, So if it's an individual level, if you don't ask them to fact find or get coaching, physical level, maybe to get some sports and actually get some physical activity to kind of let go what they have here. So I would actually work with that package, cognitive, emotional, and physical, if that makes sense, Robin.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. Thanks so much. Thanks so much. Wonderful presentation.
Great question. Thanks for joining.
Love it. We've got maybe time for, I appreciate that we're at the top of the hour and people have to go, but we've got one question here from Chris. What would be your favorite practices for increasing your own well-being? There's hundreds of reviews on this, Scott, and we both probably have read zillions of those, but what is your favorite practice for increasing your own well-being, Scott?
For me, it's whatever gets me into flow. And one of those things is going to the beach, going surfing, playing sports, doing different sports, get me in flow and increase my well-being. Sleeping too, just trying to relax and, like you said, take it down a notch. But the most effective personal practice for me is definitely surfing, going to the beach, getting engaged in what the ocean is doing, how my body's feeling, the connection between them. And I feel like I feel replenished, and it increases my well-being and sets me up for the work week ahead of me most times. What about you?
Yes. I debate between swimming as in sports, swim, jogging, or singing, playing piano and singing, which itself is so well known in terms of, music therapy and what it brings to people's well-being. And last but not least, just embracing my little 5 years old, hugging her. This is a positivity session itself. I have to say that I'm quite physical, so anything that helps me let go and release helps. I would say swimming and jogging. I would say that really, really works. Yeah, but for me.
The common flow, right? That's what that's my perspective.
You have to teach me how to serve. I'll teach you how to sing and perform if you want, Scott. I appreciate that this is now the top of the hour. People probably would have a lot of questions or follow-up. By all means, if you have any questions to Scott and myself, you can send us an email at the Global Leadership House. There's a QR code here. If you scan it, there's a few things, links to social media and stuff of Dr. Passion, which is behind the Global Leadership House that we are recently trying to collaborate with IPA when it comes to the work and organization type of work. But one of the things that I would invite people to look at the Global Leadership House, because the pledge of this community, which is growing and very new, is to do well by doing good and being good. And I think talking about leaders, I think there's no shame to be successful. Success defined the way you want. But you have the choice to be successful by doing good around you and being good to yourself and to people around you. So by all means, you can get in touch with us. And for those of you who have any questions, by all means, just send us an email and to me and to Scott. And if you send that to me, I will circulate that to you, Scott, as well. That has been amazing, Scott. I really loved it. And I almost finished my little glass, and this is not water, as I said. Because, hey, in the UK, 6:04 p.m. So I'm like 6 p.m. now. So I'm actually going to a pub right now for a burger. Well, it's not very healthy, but it's been amazing, Scott. I loved it. Thank you so much. Thanks for all of the comments and the questions from everyone. It's been a pleasure having all of you. And keep up with the work in positive psychology and positive leadership and trying to do good and to be good as well. Keep up with this, because I think the world right now, as it stands, needs more of people like who believe the same thing like us.
Yeah. Thank you, Coco. Thanks for hosting this session. Thanks for the participants, including Liz and Chris and Robin and our friend in Japan, where it's now 2 a.m. Please go to sleep. Thank you to everyone. And if you have any questions or about what we're doing in the IPA Work and Org division, reach out to me. I'd be happy to, kind of keep you up to date on what we're doing. And if you're interested in getting involved, we'd be happy to have you as well. So thanks to everyone. And I have to work. You get to go to the pub and have a burger. I have to work all day. I'm sorry.
I get one more day and I'm going to go a couple of days on holidays. So work hard, because work hard, but work smartly and be compassionate with yourself.
Try to practice what I preach here for the next 8 hours. So
stop, breathe, and act when it's too much. Take care, everyone. Take good care of yourself. Much love. Bye-bye. Bye.
I hope you enjoyed the chat. If you did, share, like, subscribe, and please join me for the next one.